From each happily ever after, every wish upon a star. Let's break down the movies that shaped who we are. From memory lane to now and everything in between. The most famous of films to the ones we've never seen. Decade by decade, all the times we laughed and cried. And with a little pixie dust, they will all take flight. Reliving the feelings, and we're trying our very best. And if they mean the same to you, please be our guest. So hop aboard, we would love to have you as we hang with a certain mouth, the whole gang too. If you love nostalgia stuff, we hope this does the trick. Thanks for joining us as we deep dive the magic.
Hi, and welcome back to the Deep Diving the Magic podcast. I'm KJ.
And I'm Jeffrey. And we are back again today with the 46th Disney feature-length film from May 19th, 1960. It's a film called Pollyanna. But before we get too far, we like to hope that everybody had a happy and healthy Thanksgiving yesterday, surrounded by things and people that you are thankful for, and that this episode could be the soundtrack to your Black Friday shopping. But before we get too deep into it, would you like to start us off with a synopsis about Pollyanna, or maybe some opening thoughts?
Sure. A young girl comes to an embittered town and confronts its attitude with her determination to see the best in life.
Yeah, that's the film. Any thoughts before we have some, or maybe some opening research you did?
Sure. So this film is streaming on Disney Plus, so you can catch it there. It is listed as a drama and a coming-of-age film.
That's one way to put it,
Yeah. Kevin Corcoran appears again at the beginning of this movie with another dog, and he is the guy that was in, the young kid that was in Old Yeller, Shaggy Dog, and Toby Tyler.
And he's got a bunch of movies coming up.
Yeah.
He's definitely the new Bobby Driscoll, but we'll get there.
Yeah. So I guess if you want some little trivia facts about him, he actually made friends with Hayley Mills, which is the female character that plays Pollyanna. And he was telling her about some kind of like Actors Guild, and like the laws that protected like child actors.
Their money from being stolen.
Yeah. So he talked to her about that. Unfortunately, it didn't help her too much, because I guess with her being a British citizen, things were a little bit different from her. So she signed the deal with Disney to do this movie, and then it was voided because it was against British law for a child under 14 to leave the country for gain. So Disney agreed to delay the payment to Hayley until she turned 14. So this proved to be legal, so then she was signed again.
It's funny because she's in a bunch of movies coming up.
Yeah. And Walt Disney's wife, Lily, actually went shopping one day with this guy named Bill Anderson's wife, and they were in London, England, shopping. They saw Hayley Mills in Tiger Bay, which was put out in 1959, and they thought that she would be perfect for the role of Pollyanna. And then basically Lillian had her way, and Disney, I guess, watched it with somebody else, and then they decided, she is good, I agree with this, and then that's when they decided they wanted to cast her.
I'm sorry. The film is based on the 1913 novel of the same name by Eleanor Porter, I'm sorry. It's also, as you mentioned, it is Hayley Mills' first of 6 Disney films, and it's Kevin Corcoran's 4th film of very many more to come.
Yeah.
And I wrote that they are definitely the new Bobby Driscoll and Luana Patton.
Yeah.
And then because, actually, do you have any more facts before I?
Interesting little trivia. So she is actually still alive today, and she is still making movies. She is in a movie that I just recently saw with our friend Elena, called Trapped. Wouldn't recommend it. It wasn't a great movie. But she was in that movie, so I thought that was cool when I was researching it that she's still out there making movies. She was actually awarded a special juvenile Oscar for her role in this film. Um, and it was the last juvenile Oscar that would be awarded. She was not present to accept the award, so Annette Funicelli,
Michelle.
Funicello, accepted it for her. Um, Basically, her father, Sir John Mills, would not pull her out of school for the event. So she didn't even know that she was nominated for an Oscar, more or less than she actually won one, until it arrived on her doorstep, which I thought was interesting.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah. She had no idea about the 1961 ceremony or anything about it. Could you imagine just and then ironically, this Oscar has been stolen from her twice. The first time she was able to get it back, I guess it was stolen maybe when she lived at her parents' house because I guess a guy called and said, "Hey, I think I found this," and then they actually found several of the missing items from her house, which included weird things, and the Oscar, so they got it back. But then the second time it was stolen, they did not find it, and I think the Oscars actually granted her a replacement Oscar since nobody ever found the Oscar the second time. So interesting little Oscar notes, I guess.
Right. So we ready to dive in?
Sure.
Well, the last fact before we dive in is most important fact because we covered it in our last movie. This is the first film in my parents' lifetime. Um, so
Boy.
before we get started, I did just want to clarify because this might get confusing because the two main characters in this film are named Polly and Pollyanna. Why they would do that, I don't know, but that's so get ready for that.
I would like to think that Pollyanna was named after her Aunt
Well,
Polly.
don't spoil it.
I would like to think that.
But
I mean, how did I just spoil it? You just talked about both of their
oh, I
names.
didn't say what the relationship was.
Oh, whatever.
So we start off with the credits, and during the credits, we see some kids in their underwear jumping off a rope string swings into the river under a train bridge. Um, kids in their underwear is not on my Disney bingo card, but hey, there we are.
Yeah.
We see a boy who is the Kevin Corcoran character, um, which is again the boy
With
from
another dog.
boy from a bunch of movies we've watched recently.
Yeah.
He's running like with a big wheel. I don't know how else to describe it besides it's a big wheel.
Like a hoop.
Yeah.
Like a hula hoop, maybe.
And he's running besides this wheel. We see girls pushing their dolls in carriages. We see that there's sheep running away from the big wheel, but then the boy crashes into some livestock, and he gets yelled at for playing around when the train is coming, which is funny because back in So Dear to My Heart, which is obviously different people, they didn't care about kids playing anywhere near the train. But
Yeah.
so he gets yelled at for playing around when the train's coming. But then he's able to like sneak some chain link on the train tracks, and but then the train stops. The train stops in the town, and we see like a nicely dressed little girl get off the train, and an older couple. A snooty lady is mad about that there was people smoking in the car in the train.
Hmm.
But we do learn that the little girl is Pollyanna, who was our main character. She's right here in this movie. Um, so we learn that Pollyanna has recently lost her parents, and but then she's instantly talked to by some more snooty ladies
Yeah.
that are telling her to be more appreciative and to not cause any trouble.
Yeah. I felt like they were very rude.
No, I could go on and on about that in this, but then the little boy is watching Pollyanna behind a tree. We will soon learn that this little boy loves trees. But she gets in a car and the car drives away and it drives to a very, very large house. And everybody in this film, everybody that we meet so far is very prissy, except for the little boy, and I guess to an extent Pollyanna. But then we meet Aunt Polly, who Pollyanna is coming to stay with. after her parents' passing, and she lives in this very, very big house, and she's very proper. She's
Yeah.
great way to put it. But the first scene that we see her in is she's working on a sermon with the Reverend.
Hmm.
She's like giving the Reverend some notes and stuff on the sermon.
Which kind of like, if you really pay attention in the film, you'll start to notice all the pull that she
Yeah.
has
Mhm.
in the town.
Correct.
Especially, it's kind of odd if you think about a woman in that time frame having that much pull anywhere, and then her having so much influence as to actually what goes on and is discussed in the sermon at church.
Yep. She does say
I thought that was
she,
interesting.
she does say strike hard on Sunday with the excessiveness of God's wrath and hope that they carry it through the whole week. Um, so right away, Aunt Polly makes Pollyanna stand erect and proper and gives her a hard time for her choice of dress. Um, she says, but then Pollyanna comes back with something that would be a reoccurring thing is that she's glad about her dress
Mhm.
because it's not a pair of boys' trousers. Um, so they are very proper. I wrote that a bunch of people in this movie are very much sticks in the mud. They no one is ever late for meals in the house. Like there's a whole lot of like staff working in the house. It's just
Yeah.
so Pollyanna then asks if her aunt is rich, which they don't appreciate. We meet a very snooty, grumpy cook. Um, and but through all of these rude people, Pollyanna continues to be kind to everybody.
Hmm.
She meets um, a maid named Elizabeth, which I might have written her name down wrong later. But so she meets a maid. Pollyanna has a milk mustache. Everybody, like again, she is just not fitting in.
Yep.
The maids are stuffy. Everybody's stuffy. They tell Pollyanna, "You sure are a question asker, aren't you?"
Yeah.
Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna talk about how, like you said, like her aunt was talking about the outfit that she had on and how she was a Harrington, so she was gonna start dressing like one.
Yeah,
And it definitely seemed like
I want to check something while you're
in this
talking.
opening that there was gonna be a lot of adjusting on Pollyanna's point to having money. Like it sounds like she came from
Modest beans,
yeah, being very
which we will
modest,
definitely
and
talk about in a second.
now she's gonna have to adjust to like having all this money. And the aunt took her shopping with one of the maids,
Yeah, I
Nancy,
was gonna get there next. Yeah.
and it was quite amazing to see how many clothes they walked out with. I don't know if because they didn't come in shopping bags like what we would have now. They were in boxes,
Boxes.
and there were tons of boxes. Which makes me wonder, was there only one outfit per box, or did
Mhm.
they just fill the box up as much as they could?
She's gonna be there a long time, so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I want to stand corrected. I said that the maid's name was Elizabeth. I wanted to check that though. Her name is Nancy.
Yes, Nancy.
Nancy. So there's so many empty rooms in this house. This is before they go out shopping. There's so many empty rooms in this house, but Polly puts Pollyanna in a small room in the attic.
Hmm.
But Pollyanna is still glad because it's a room of her own.
Hmm.
She looks at the window, and at the same time she looks at the window, she sees that Nancy, not Elizabeth,
I thought it was a big room.
but it's a small room in the attic compared to all these other rooms that they crossed when they were walking up, which
I guess.
she addresses later on. She looks out the window
Hmm.
of her attic room and she sees Nancy and a man that are hugging romantically, but is told that it's none of her business.
Hmm.
Um, she changes for dinner, and then
Aunt Polly tells her it's none of her business.
yes, she changes for dinner, and then we see Aunt Polly saying grace before her and her and Pollyanna are at this giant dinner table where it's just two of them.
Hmm.
Pollyanna tries to copy her aunt, but she spills her milk. And then this is where I was saying that the aunt chose the room so high up because she's not used to the children's noises in the house.
Hmm.
Very rude of her. And then Pollyanna, this is a kind of a funny thing. Pollyanna asks Aunt Polly if she has ever had steak and ice cream because her father says that if they ever had the money that Aunt Polly had, they would have steak and ice cream 3 times a day, every day. And Polly scolds her for to stop quoting her father. She quotes her father a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and then the maid Nancy gets in trouble for seeing the man whose name is George earlier for their romantic embrace because Aunt Polly's awful. But then this is where we dive into what you were just saying. Um, Pollyanna gets told that they must set a good example and for everyone and everything in the town. And so like in the morning they're gonna go shopping for clothes.
Hmm.
And Pollyanna is excited because she's never had store-bought clothes before. So that answers your question of coming from meager means and stuff like that. She's never had store-bought clothes.
Well, I
Pollyanna,
assumed she was used to being modest.
yep. So then Pollyanna, before bed, does ask for permission to give Aunt Polly a kiss goodnight,
Hmm.
which perplexes Aunt Polly. But so we go to the store, like you said. Everybody's excited. Everybody's helping them buy these things. There's a bunch of boxes. She tries on a bunch of different various snooty clothes
Hmm.
and leaves with dozens and dozens of boxes. And what's in those boxes? Store-bought clothes. We then see again Nancy, and she's kissed this time by George outside of the store, but they try to cover it up by saying that it's her long lost cousin Fred.
Hmm.
So then this cousin lover guy, George, Fred, whatever, he offers to bring the two of them for ice cream, which makes Pollyanna really excited because clearly they're trying to butter her up for what she saw. But on the way to ice cream, we see a bunch of people that are like bombarding a train station and like bombarding a house because we learned that the pipes burst at the orphanage.
Yeah.
And all the people are mad at Aunt Polly because Aunt Polly owns the orphanage, but she doesn't want to do anything to it because it was like handed down from her father.
Hmm.
Anything else on that? Did I miss anything on that? No. Okay.
Hmm.
Pollyanna doesn't want. I'm sorry. Nancy doesn't want Pollyanna to tell her aunt about the ice cream date, but Pollyanna's father told her never to tell a lie. But she does cover for Nancy when she says that it was Pollyanna's fault that they were late. So she
Hmm.
does cover for her. But then we meet this guy named Edmund Doctor, um, who is visiting on vacation, and I'm sorry, Aunt Polly. The names are so close. Aunt Polly is very intrigued because clearly she knows him from her past.
Hmm.
But so then all these people are meeting at Aunt Polly's house to like go over this catastrophe that's going on with the pipes burst at the orphanage. So that they have like a town hall, like a town meeting at like in one of the many many rooms at Aunt Polly's house.
Hmm.
So Pollyanna's told she can't be there, but she hides in a plant to listen to all the people that are and they're all arguing over the orphanage pipe.
Yep.
But then this Ed guy finds Pollyanna in the bush, like a fake tree bush thing,
Hmm.
and they kind of like talk in secret. He sneaks her food, so clearly he's one of the nice guys.
Hmm.
Ed talks very negatively about the condition of the orphanage, um, but that really does irritate Polly because again they have some sort of relationship here.
Yeah.
And then in the meantime, Nancy also gives Pollyanna a mirror for her room for not blowing her spot earlier, but then the other maids give her a hard time because again everybody in this movie is unlikable. I don't know if they made that more so Pollyanna's more likable, but it's like everybody's
I think it's just so you see the change that she starts to have on
yeah,
the entire town.
correct. But I don't want to get too far ahead yet. So then they're all talking about Sunday. Sunday's coming up. And
Hmm.
they're like, "Oh, Sunday, the day off." And
Sour
everyone's
stomach.
everyone the day off.
Sour stomach Sunday.
But then they were like, "No, it's Sour Stomach Sunday and you're going to see why." And then here's where we see why.
And Pollyanna assumes that it's going to be because of whatever they're going to have
Yeah,
for
what they're going
food.
to eat, like chicken or whatever that she was saying.
And the maid's like, or the cook is like, no, you'll see.
You'll see. So then Sunday comes and they go to church. The ladies have some very interesting Kentucky Derby type hats on. But then we see this preacher who is just yelling. He is preaching, but he is just going off. He's He is that kind of preacher. But then we see that Pollyanna sees this boy who is the boy from earlier, who we find out was an orphan, who's playing with a frog in church,
Mhm.
probably from his pocket from when he played in Old Yeller.
I hope not.
So, but they, um, afterwards, the ladies are all sitting outside and they're discussing the fiery, screaming preaching, and but then the maids stop talking about that and they start talking about um, how they hate how Pollyanna is glad about everything. But then she says that it was a game that she played with her father because her father taught her um, the glad game because there's always something to be glad about.
Mhm.
And then we see the orphan boy who's climbing. He climbs down a tree from the orphanage because he loves trees, like I said earlier. And he goes up to Pollyanna to introduce himself, and they discuss God and trees. They kind of mock each other, but he takes her fishing, and they like use like a bucket to like catch fish. And so Polly like chews up like a cow in front of a cow. Um, but then we see Ed is also fishing, and Pollyanna asks him about her and Polly, and they discuss how they used to be in love, so that makes sense. And then
How she used to wear her hair very long and beautiful,
which will come up later.
because now she just basically has it prim and proper and pinned up.
Yep. So then the orphan boy, who we will soon learn his name is Jimmy, but the orphan boy talks about how much he loves trees. Because again, he loves trees. He's always climbing them, and he wants to show Pollyanna the best climbing tree in town. But that involves the two of them sneaking into a private property through a hole in the fence for old man Pendergast's place, the meanest man in town, old man Pendergast. But at the same time, while they're sneaking in, the old man notices them. He like opens his window and he sees them, but the kids don't notice that. So then the boy shows her the best climbing tree in town. Um, Pollyanna kind of loses her temper a little bit because clearly she wasn't playing the glad game at that point. Um, he he convinces her to like give him a lift up the tree, but at the same time, Pendergast comes out, and he grabs them, and the boy gets caught. She gets to run away, but the boy gets caught and dragged into the house. And they're like, he talking about, oh, he keeps kids in the basement and he all this stuff, and he's got, he's the worst man in town, and he kind of plays into it.
Mhm.
So, but then Pollyanna
I
does.
guess it's a good thing if you don't want kids on your property to play into
True.
it, because then they're going to be terrified
Yeah.
and they're going to try to run away.
So then Pollyanna sneaks back into the house to stop the mean man from disciplining or harboring the boy. All he wanted to do was climb the tree. This is where we learned his name is Jimmy. But Pendergast does let them go this time. And then he lets them go. But then as they're leaving, and I'll let you talk about this scene, but Pollyanna is mesmerized by these rainbows on the wall that were like reflecting from
Prisms.
the through like the prisms that he had like hanging out like a old ancient lighters, no, like a antique, I guess is the
Yeah, it was like
antique, yeah,
a fancy lamp from back in the day that
and
had
like prisms hanging from it,
little like crystal prisms hanging off of it to
and
make
it
it look
caused
fancy,
and it caused
with the
like
light
a
reflecting through it.
reflecting rainbows on it.
Yeah.
Um, but then we go back to Aunt Polly's house and we see that Ed showed up to Aunt Polly because he had seen Pollyanna earlier. He admits that the reason he came back was because he wanted to see Aunt Polly, and he wants to see what happened to her, if she's married or what happened to
Yeah,
her.
and specifically, Polly told him that she would be home. Or Pollyanna told him that
Oh
she
yeah,
would be
okay,
home.
yeah. See these names.
Yeah, it is.
So, but then they end up arguing. They're arguing over false charity, and he ends up leaving. But then when Pollyanna gets home, Polly is mad at her because her new dress is filthy from playing.
The good days of being a child.
That's right. So then the next day, they're making charity baskets because that's their duty to make charity baskets.
Mhm.
And then Nancy and Pollyanna are out delivering all these charity baskets. They're singing, they're just having a good time delivering these, but they have one left at the end because they have to go deliver this to Mrs. Snow.
Mhm.
Mrs. Snow's house. And the only way that they keep describing this lady is she's cantankerous. So she's just a grumpy lady who is what's the word for it when you think that
Hypochondriac.
hypochondriac and but they keep
To the
saying
point where she is convinced she is dying.
yes.
She's
And she's just
dying.
grumpy. Like even her
In my
daughter,
condition,
Yep.
I shouldn't have to do this.
even her
And
daughter is just like, she's cantankerous. But Pollyanna just lets herself right into the room to deliver her charity jelly. She's like, "Oh, I wanted this instead." She was just being very cantankerous.
But Pollyanna tells her, "Oh, they said you'd say that."
Yeah. She does say though, this is one way to describe life. She says, "Just pills and bills. That's all. Just pills and bills." But she also then
Story of my life.
she's trying to like cheer up Mrs. Snow, so she uses Mrs. Snow's prisms to make sun rainbows on the wall,
Yeah.
which intrigues Mrs. Snow.
Hmm.
So if Jimmy never had him sneak into that house, she would never been able to intrigue the cantankerous Mrs. Snow. Nancy and Snow's daughter see the two of them creating rainbows, and they're getting along in a cantankerous way. But then so that scene's over, and then we see the next scene where the people of the town have decided that they're going to raise money on their own for the orphanage. They are just going against Aunt Polly. They're going to raise their own money.
Hmm.
They're talking about different committees for the bazaar and how to raise money. We see George again, who's the guy that was rendezvousing with Nancy, cousin Fred, or whatever, and he has this incredibly short tie on. His tie only like this long. But then we see cuts to the next scene, and Jimmy and his friends from the orphanage are like running behind an ice truck, and they jump onto it to steal some ice because he had all that practice from when he was Toby Tyler.
Hmm.
So and then we learn that Polly's going to be one of the leads at the bazaar, and she's all excited. She's all excited. She wants everybody to get involved. She's going to get everybody involved.
Hmm.
So one of the people that she's going to get involved is Old Man Pendergast. So she tells Jimmy that they're going to go back. He calls her nutty,
Yeah.
but she convinces him to let them in. And she wants to show, first off, she wants to show Jimmy the rainbow on the wall, and she wants to convince him to like make these rainbow things to sell for the right
Rainbow makers.
rainbow makers to sell at the bazaar.
Mhm.
Pendergast says that Jimmy has so much hair that it looks like he's wearing a coonskin cap. So that's a little callback right there. But they string up all the glass crystals and they make this big rainbow. She tries to recruit him to sell, like I said, and the scene ends with him kind of scratching his chin, kind of he's thinking about it. But then we cut to the cantankerous Mrs. Snow, where Pollyanna busts into her room, trying to convince her to stitch a quilt
Mhm.
to auction off
So she has quilting squares.
Yep, to auction. Yeah, she brings in the squares to auction off at the bazaar.
As Mrs. Snow wants her to get those dirty rags off my bed.
That's right. But in the meantime, she's too busy because she's picking out the lining for her coffin. This coffin salesman guy.
Actually, she's picking that out, but Pollyanna has no idea what she's doing. And they were talking about satin of a certain color.
Yep.
And Pollyanna just meekly says, "Oh, are you gonna have a dress made?" And I was like, "Oh yeah."
So Pollyanna off of that, Pollyanna does say she tells her to stop thinking about dying so much, and then tells her what her father used to say about living and how they came up with the Glad game.
Yeah.
This is where she tells a story about where she really wanted a doll.
Mm-hmm.
So they sent out to like the missionaries to get her a doll,
Mm-hmm.
but she received crutches instead. But at least they were glad that she didn't have to use the crutches.
Yeah.
Um, But so they talk about how they hit him with the Glad game, but she ends up yelling at Mrs. Snow and the coffin salesman because again she is not being great at her own game. But she tells Mrs. Snow she doesn't want to see her anymore.
She's never gonna visit her again.
Nope. But then we see the cantankerous Mrs. Snow kind of debating, like making the cult, like,
Yeah.
and then she
The
kind of
guy
begins to
that was with
smile.
her that was like trying to sell her the coffin,
Yep.
he was like, "Well, I didn't mean to be rude to her." And then he ends up leaving and she grabs the quilting
Yeah.
squares that she called dirty rags and she starts stitching them
Yeah, she
together.
starts like smiling.
And her daughter walks by and like puts something away in one of the dresser drawers, but then like does like a double take of like looking at her mom, and her mom looks up at her and she smiles as she's stitching things together. She walks out of the room and then backs up and looks again, and her mom's just like smiling. But you have to watch this section if you don't watch the rest of the movie, because it was the creepiest music in the background
There's a lot of
with
music
this
in that.
lady that's been nothing but mean and cantankerous, and then all of a sudden she's just smiling like,
Hmm.
and then you have this like creepy music.
So speaking of mean ladies, the next unit cuts to Aunt Polly, and
Ah, Polly.
she's upset about the whole bazaar thing and how Pollyanna's involvement.
Going against her.
But then the maid staff are like, we're gonna go against her too, and we're gonna bake cakes. We're gonna bake dozens and dozens of cakes for this bazaar.
Yes.
But then we learn that the small town papers are not going to print about the bazaar because they're owned by Polly's family,
Hmm.
and they can't afford to antagonize her. People are just scared.
Yeah.
Polly and her ex-boyfriend bicker some more because some things never change. He tells her to get off. He says something about how like he's gonna tell her off like water off of a duck's back or something like that. That was an interesting line.
Yeah.
But then we see Aunt Polly who runs upstairs and in private she's combing her long hair like you said, and
But
she's crying. Go ahead.
I thought they also for the bazaar were having an issue with like um where they were gonna have it.
Yeah, it's just like there's no promotion, so
And then that's when Polly had told the guy that nobody owns the church.
no, that's next.
I thought he said that too.
Yep. So that's after that. After Polly goes upstairs, um, Polly is then told that the bazaar is off, and Pollyanna is like, all we have to do is get the reverend to like talk about it because we don't have the newspaper anymore.
Mm-hmm.
All we have to do is have the reverend talk about it, and she says because nobody owns the church. Polly does not own the church. So then they all like the grown-ups, the adults that are into the bazaar, Ed and all the people are like trying to convince the Reverend to um convince him to say talk about the bazaar.
Yeah.
And he says that the pulpit is not for public announcements. I wrote clearly only for yelling in his case. And then but then we see that Pollyanna stumbles across the Reverend who's practicing his sermon in the field.
Mm-hmm.
He is very intensely practicing this sermon, the fiery speeches or whatever they said from earlier. And he catches her watching, but he kind of just keeps his practice going. But she goes up to him to give him something from Polly. So clearly it's like the notes that she has for the sermon, like from earlier in the film. But then Pollyanna offers to help him with the sermon because she used to help her father make his sermons. And then he is not finding the positives in it. So then she shows him a chain that her father always wore that she has now. That reads, "If you look for the bad in the mankind while trying to find it, you surely will," which is a quote from Abraham Lincoln, which is Walt's favorite president. Go ahead.
That is actually not a quote. That is false.
Okay.
Ironically, I guess.
I was just saying what I
Yeah,
watched.
well, I did read that too, but I guess Roy had lockets made that had that inscription on it
Mhm.
um for like a special release of when this came out. And then they had to emergency pull them because they found out that the producer just made that up.
Oh,
That's
so
actually not a quote by
well,
Abraham Lincoln.
well, he just wanted to throw in the because Abraham is Walt's favorite
But
president.
yeah, there were lockets made, so I bet they
Yeah.
were probably worth a lot of money.
But he's still practicing his fiery speech,
Mhm.
and she tells him that she wants him to use the happy text from the Bible because her father used to use the happy text from the Bible. But then as she leaves, you can see that her words kind of have influenced the Reverend a little bit. He reads the letter with the note, like the critiques and notes from Aunt Polly,
Mm.
and he crumples them up because he starts to realize that maybe Aunt Polly does own the church. And that's when he says nobody owns the church as he crumples it up.
Yeah.
So then we cut to the Reverend walking up to the pulpit. He's very kind of nervous to begin his nervous. All the people are in the audience or in the pews. The waiters have the fancy hats on, and they're all kind of like not nervous, but they're all like they know how this is going to go because it's turn your stomach Sundays or whatever they said, whatever you
Sour
said,
stomach
sour
Sundays.
stomach sour stomach Sunday. But he gives his sermon, but it's very calm, and he says that it's from the happy text from the Bible, which is much to Aunt Polly's shock. He decides that he and Pollyanna had told him that there was like 80 happy texts or whatever, and he's like, "There's not 80. There's exactly 86 or whatever it was,"
Mm.
and he's gonna read one every week. That's gonna make it for however long this is.
Mhm.
And he says that the visits are going to be much happier and more of a choice, which kind of shocks everybody.
Mhm.
Um, and he does, and he says that after all these years, he apologizes because he doesn't even know his congregation and that he's been failing them, and then he decides to dismiss them all out into the sunshine to go enjoy God's sunshine.
Mhm.
But then as everyone's leaving, he stops them. He decides that he's going to stop them, and you're like, oh, what's going on? And what does he do? He tells everybody about the charity bazaar. So he does tell everyone about the charity bazaar. The whole congregation cheers, and then we cut to the bazaar. It
Mhm.
is a rousing party. There's kids. Everybody's having a good time, but we don't see Pollyanna. So the kids are trying to find Pollyanna.
Mhm.
So then Jimmy decides that he's going to go find her, and he's like, "All right, I'm going to go do what I do best, and I'm going to climb this tree because dude loves trees." He's going to climb the tree up to her attic window, where we learn that she was locked in her room.
Well, she probably was not locked in her
I
room,
did
but
read it like I was like reading the like synopsis, and it still says she was locked in her room, like on that, but I guess they don't cover it in the movie, but
we never saw her room locked.
yeah. But he convinces her to escape
Mhm.
down the tree. So she does escape. She pays a penny for a slice of watermelon at the bazaar. I did not look up how much money that would be today. But everybody's dancing, everybody's having a good time. And what do we see? We see that Pendergast is selling the rainbow makers,
Mhm.
and Mrs. Snow is auctioning off the finished quilt.
Mhm.
So you know, she got them to buy in.
Mhm.
Um, but then everybody is going up to Pollyanna, and they keep telling her she's got to change. She's got to change because she has to.
You have to go get in your costume.
She's
Everybody's waiting on you.
she's the star of the performance.
Mhm.
So then, as she's going to
Hang
change,
on.
go ahead.
Well, maybe we're about to cover it. I'll let you go.
Yeah. So as she's going to perform, she stops at like a carnival game. Is that what you're gonna say?
Yes.
Okay. Stops at a carnival game where she has to like hook a something, and then she wins whatever she hooks.
Yeah. She's going fishing.
She's going fishing, not without Jimmy's bucket, but she's going fishing. And I forgot what she landed on first, but Mrs. Snow kind
A
of like
horse.
a horse. Okay.
Like a toy. It was like a small toy rocking horse or something.
Mrs. Snow like sneaks in.
I was very confused by this
Yeah.
game.
Mrs. Snow like sneaks in and
is silently like,
No, don't go.
don't, not that one.
Give
And
her
then she starts pointing over to
the doll.
and then the woman grabs the doll, just like, yeah.
So they
And she
decide
goes away.
that they're finally going to give her a doll.
Yeah.
The doll is dressed exactly like Pollyanna, which I think is hilarious. But
Well, it is very similar because I thought it was exactly alike, but then I realized later it's not an exact match, but it's enough
Yeah.
that it matches her.
So then we see that the Reverend's there. He's having a good time. You want to see you want to cover this part?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Reverend comes in, and there's a dunk tank.
That's the word I couldn't think of.
Yeah.
Dunk tank.
So there's a dunk tank, and there's a clown sitting in the dunk tank. And the Reverend asks the guy that's selling the balls that you throw at the dunk tank to dunk the person, like, oh, is that such and such? And he's like, yeah. And then the clown's like, oh, you couldn't hit this, da 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 da. And he's like talking all this smack to the Reverend. And then the Reverend's like, I've been trying to get you baptized for the last 3 years. And he throws the 3 balls, misses the 2, but on the last one, he does hit it and dunks
The clown.
the clown.
Do you think that his fastballs were as fiery as his sermons were?
No,
So
I don't, but I mean, do you think he's gonna count that as baptizing the
yes.
guy?
So we see more or there's more music, there's more dancing, there's more fancy hats.
Yeah.
But then we see that Pollyanna is dressed like part of the American flag and she sings the Star Spangled
But
Banner.
hang on, they go and they stand up in a line,
She's-
and then she realizes she's in the wrong spot,
Yeah.
so they have to move over.
Because she has like the stars on her.
Yeah, but she has the part of her where it like transitions from the stars to the stripes.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking to myself, because Jimmy kept saying, Pollyanna has to be there because if she doesn't, she'll ruin the flag. I kept thinking, what is he talking about? And then when I watched it, I was like, well, she ruined the flag anyway. But
Yeah.
then they switched it over quickly. But yeah.
So she sings like her solo on the Star Spangled Banner.
Yeah.
Everybody's in awe. And honestly, she's really quite good.
Yeah.
And so the bazaar ends and everybody's happy. We see a smile fill Pollyanna and her doll, but she's like going home, but she decides that she's going to, so she doesn't want to get in trouble. She's going to climb the tree back up to her room because she's learned from the best. She puts the doll in her mouth.
Well, she first walked up to the front door
Yeah.
and then looked in the window, but she sees Aunt Polly sitting
Yeah.
there. I don't know if she was reading or what she was doing, but she was sitting where Pollyanna would have gotten caught had she walked in through the front door.
So she's going to climb the tree back up to her room.
Yeah. The way she exited the house, she's going to enter it back again.
So she puts the doll in her mouth
Mhm.
and she's going to go up.
Oh, this doll.
So she slips. She does slip, but she's able to catch herself,
Mhm.
which startles Aunt Polly, who goes out to check to see what the noise is, but they don't see. She does not see Pollyanna, so Pollyanna gets away with it, and she's able to make it to the ledge of the
Mhm.
window, but then she drops. She unfortunately drops her new beloved doll.
She slips when she makes it to the window.
And drops the doll.
Yeah.
Onto the roof.
Yeah.
So then she's going to reach the doll, but then she falls and hits the ground, which then causes Aunt Polly and the maids to run out and see what's going on, very distraught.
Because they were still outside.
Yeah.
Because the maids were like, what are you doing out here? And she's like, I thought I heard something.
Yeah. So very distraught.
Yeah.
I wrote here that the entire tone of the film just quickly changes.
Yes.
Well,
I wrote right here, why did she not go in the back door the way the maids exited in the beginning of this
that's
festival
because she,
thing?
her and John, or her and Jimmy.
Why did you go through the window? You could have clearly went in the back of the house. This house is so big, it has to have at least 1 or 2 back doors.
The 2 front doors, like
And
like our houses around here.
Yes. And ironically, when I was doing some research on this is not the first film that the actress that plays Pollyanna falls out of a tree in.
Really?
This is the first of, I think, 2 movies where she falls out of a tree.
So, the whole tone of the film changes at this point.
Yeah.
But then we cut to Aunt Polly, who over some very tense, sad music is like wants to talk to everybody in the house, all the staff and everything,
Mm-hmm.
because she says that they have to move Pollyanna to a room with a nicer view because her legs are now paralyzed.
Mm-hmm.
So Pollyanna is now paralyzed, which um, she doesn't know how she's going to tell her. But I wrote here, I guess once again, she did trade in her doll for those crutches, like in that story earlier.
Well, kind of, but her legs were paralyzed, so I don't think she
No,
would have been able to use crutches.
she traded
Oh,
in, which is probably why they said that earlier in the thing. But
I guess.
um,
So she got the doll instead of the crutches.
That's
terrible.
well, the crutches into the doll again.
Oh, foreshadowing.
So the Reverend comes running in to check on her. We see, but then we see that Jimmy is trying to get Pollyanna to come out and play, but he's told about the accident.
Yeah, one of
Um,
the garden keepers is telling him to be quiet. Like
yeah.
Pollyanna can't come out. She's hurt right now. She's had an accident.
The Polly.
And it's all his fault because he showed her how to climb in a
Hey,
tree.
well, speaking of all that fault, that's what I'm going to get to next. Aunt Polly and the Reverend are arguing, but then she admits that she feels like the whole thing is her fault.
Yeah.
And then the Reverend gives a whole rousing speech about how Pollyanna gave a miracle to the whole town and how they should thank God for sending her to them.
Yeah.
And then the doctor, who of course, who else would it be, is Polly's ex Ed. He wants to see Polly and tells her all about Pollyanna's injuries.
Yeah.
But then we cut to upstairs or whatever room Pollyanna's in, and the maid Nancy is trying to get Pollyanna to play the glad game.
Yeah.
She's even mentioning steak and ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
But Pollyanna is too depressed to play, and she never wants to play that silly game again. And she just
Mm-hmm.
wants everyone to leave. Like I said, the whole tone has changed. She is no longer glad. She
Yeah.
is depressed. Dr. Ed is talking about how they have to transport her, but he's afraid that her depression is going to slow up her being able to get healthy again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so then Aunt Polly says that she wishes that she had given her love earlier, and then Ed says that him and Polly together can give Pollyanna the love that she deserves, and they kind of like embrace that they're gonna give it a shot.
Mm-hmm.
But then we see that there's like they're like they instantly like the staff is like, oh my god, they're gonna kill the flowers. They're gonna like I don't know if you
Yeah.
have been saying that, but they're like they're rushing the house and Aunt Polly's like, what are you talking about?
It really wasn't as dramatic as the guy was making it
He
out
was
to be.
he was like he
Like
sounded like
when
a
it,
monster truck was like
yeah,
driving
like
towards the
when it
house.
was actually showing it, I was like, what is this guy talking about? Like he is way overreacting about this.
But we then cut to see out the window that there's dozens and dozens and dozens of people coming to visit Pollyanna. Like the whole town is coming to visit Pollyanna. And they all have gifts for her.
Mm-hmm.
And they are led by Mrs. Snow. And Mrs. Snow says that they are bringing gladness to her life like she brought to all theirs.
Mm-hmm.
Polly opens the door and invites them all in because she's changing, and she invites them in. And Ed picks up Pollyanna and brings her down the stairs, so that the whole town is waiting for her. And then one by one, what's that?
I don't know. Like whenever when someone has a spinal injury, they
Oh yeah,
always tell you not to move the person. Well, first of all, she got moved up to the bedroom, which is God knows how many stories up from the ground where she fell outside. And then the doctor brings her out to see everyone,
he's not
but
carrying her.
he's just carrying her. So it's like she's the back is not stabilized or anything. And you're talking about how you have to do this serious surgery on this little girl, and you're gonna just carry her out. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, you done messed up everything, sir. I don't know where you went to school, but
Yeah.
better make sure she ain't depressed, because
Well,
surgery ain't gonna take now.
so he brings her out, and they all one by one they wish her luck, and like they kind of like it's all the ways that she did it to
Yeah.
them throughout the film. Like one of them is like the charity jelly. One of them was like the animals.
This is not charity, it's a gift.
It's a gift,
from one friend to another.
which is what she said to the guy earlier
Yeah.
in the film. We see that Nancy and the dude with the short tie got engaged, and Nancy says that Pollyanna is going to be the flower girl at the wedding. Um, the wait staff tell her to hurry home. Mrs. Snow even says like that she will see her soon.
Mhm.
And then one of the biggest surprises in the entire film, we cut to Mr. Pendergast, who's with Jimmy, and he says that he's adopted Jimmy. Like,
Yeah.
talk about
And they're going to sell rainbow makers for the rest of their
Yep,
lives.
so they've adopted, which causes Pollyanna to smile,
Yeah.
and she hugs Aunt Polly. They then rush her to the train station to get on the train to go to surgery. And then as the whole town is watching and waving goodbye, Pollyanna looks out the window and sees the town name, which I didn't even remember what the name of the town was. And it says Glad Town underneath it.
Yeah.
And that's the end.
Yep.
Kind of leaves like an open-ended,
Yeah.
ended.
So,
What is the name of the? Keep looking. I want to look the name of
the orphanage house is actually still on the Warner Brothers back lot.
Harrington.
And it sits next to the house used in Elvira, Mistress of Darkness in
Oh.
1988. So the orphanage house that they used is still there.
Did they fix the pipes?
I don't know.
Harrington is the name of the town, by the way.
Yeah. And Haley Mills, that played Pollyanna, did have a very big career in Hollywood, and eventually got her own sitcom, Good Morning Miss Bliss, which came out in like 1987, where she played a teacher, and eventually that ended up
Miss Bliss, and that became Saved by the Bell.
good. Yes, it was the spinoff that turned into Saved by the Bell. Thanks, Jeff.
I didn't mean to ruin that, but I was like shocked.
1989, yes. So yes,
I knew that Saved by the Bell was originally called Good Morning Miss Bliss.
yes, there you go.
Wow, I didn't know that she was in that.
Yeah, and this
Did she teach Lisa Tuttle? Sorry, continue.
No, I'm done talking about it now, Jeff. You already stole my thunder. I'm done.
Well, you didn't run that by me
Okay.
before you said it.
Well, I didn't have to run it by you. Just had to keep your mouth shut. You interrupted me. So anyway, going on to the movie and the performance. The movie actually performed below expectations at the box office, and Walt Disney had his theory of it. For the movie's disappointing performance, he said, "I think the picture would have done better with a different title. Girls and women went to it, but men tended to stay away because it sounded too sweet and sticky."
So what you're saying is he didn't play the glad game.
Yeah.
He was like, he could be glad that it wasn't Treasure Island.
I mean, I wonder if it performed better than Treasure.
Yeah. You gave it a 2 the other day or whatever. So
No, that was not Treasure
that was
Island.
kidnapped.
That was kidnapped, and I was like, God, I cannot do another one of those guys' movies that came from a book.
So this came from a book.
Not but it wasn't written by the guy that did Treasure Island and Kidnapped.
So
yeah, so I think that covers all.
Okay, so then how about the rating?
That I went through, but yeah, so Good Morning Miss Bliss did turn into, like you said, Saved by the Bell, but that was originally her own sitcom.
I didn't. I learned something new today. Deep dive into Magic Pod at gmail.com. I would write in right now and be like, wow, you just blew my mind.
Yeah, and then like I said in the beginning, she's still obviously acting today because she played the doctor, psychiatrist in.
Well, I mean, you mentioned that she wasn't even 14 years old when this came out in 1960, so
yeah,
she was probably born in like the late 40s, early 50s. So
I didn't look to see how old she was.
yeah.
So IMDb rated this a 7.4 out of 10.
Okay.
I gave it a 6.
Okay. Anything to say about that, or just?
I mean, it's not making my list. Spoiler alert. But it wasn't terrible. It was pretty good. It had its good points, trying to bring out the good in everybody.
So since you said it's not making your list, does it make your list upon a star? No. So would you like to read us your list upon a star for this
Going forward,
third
I'm so
film
glad I
of
could spoil that
1960s?
for you.
Go ahead.
All right, so my list is going to be Sleeping Beauty, Dumbo, Lady and the Tramp, The Three Caballeros, The Shaggy Dog, Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland, Fantasia, Toby Tyler, and or uh, 10 Weeks in the Circus, or with the circus, and then Saludos Amigos.
So I'm gonna start off. I'm gonna hold my rant for a second. This doesn't make my list either, and I'm gonna read my list before we go on my rant here for a second. But so my list upon a star is still Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland, Pinocchio, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Sleeping Beauty, Lady the Tramp, The Three Caballeros, Cinderella, and The Shaggy Dog. Okay, let me tell you about this film. All right, I work in an office. I'm not going to talk about what I do, but I work in an office, and I work with this lovely lady who I've worked with for many years. And she, when we started this podcast, she was like, "You're going to get to Pollyanna," and I was like, "Yep, I've heard about it. Clearly, I have the VHS tape right here." She's like, "My mother has based her entire life around this movie. I want to know what you're going to think of it because I can't stand it." That's what this lady said. And I was like, "Okay." The first three-fourths of this movie, I absolutely despise. I made us stop watching this movie, and I was like, "We'll try it again a different time." I don't ever do that, ever.
That's a lie.
Yeah, one time before.
Treasure Island.
Treasure. There you go. Point proven.
I was waiting on that during Kidnapped and it didn't come.
I couldn't.
And I was surprised when it came for this since it didn't come during Kidnapped.
I liked the Jimmy character. I mostly like the Pollyanna character, but everybody in this movie is insufferable, cantankerous, whatever you want to say. I couldn't take it.
I didn't mind it. I thought it was interesting to see how Pollyanna reacted with them. So I guess that's why I didn't think it was as bad as you were struggling through it.
Jeez, I couldn't. Like, I understand the
I guess,
point.
how is Little Miss Sunshine going to handle this is what I kept thinking, and that's how I got through it.
So I like turns in movies where, I'm the most positive guy there is, and I couldn't take it. But the last fourth of the movie was pleasant and it was strong. Here's what I'll say about it. I like that this film walked, so no spoilers here, but I like that this film walked so films that I absolutely love, like Mary Poppins and Bread Knobs and Broomsticks, could run because I'm okay with that we watched this. But goodness gracious, get through it in one sitting and let me know. Deep dive in the magic pod at gmail.com because I God, Aunt Polly and that one cook lady, or the whatever, the one that kept calling, the one that kept calling her mom, like
so complaining about it because they did change.
They changed,
and like even before the bazaar, like the cook and the maids, like they were like in love with little Pollyanna. And the cakes that they made were at least like four, if not.
She takes that giant piece.
Yeah, they were like at least 4 layers deep. Like these were some cakes that they made, and they made, I think, 6 different cakes that were that size, for this, and they were like, they changed. I think they had to be that insufferable in the beginning.
A good word for it.
For you to see just what kind of positive impact that Pollyanna had on this little town.
I mean, the last couple films that we watched, you were like, the aunt and uncle suck. The aunt and uncle suck. Well, the aunt in this movie sucks.
But she changes.
She
and then,
change.
like, she even tells, like, Pollyanna, she's like, I need you to get better because I love you like you were my own. Because Pollyanna taught her how to love. Because at one point, her ex, the doctor, actually said, you are incapable of giving love.
Yeah.
Like sometimes people don't want money thrown at them. Like sometimes people want you to care. And he was basically saying, like, you are incapable of this. And I mean, if it wasn't for Pollyanna, I mean, her aunt would have probably gone on her entire life and been like that. So
Eh.
you have to look at it from the glad game perspective,
The glad
Jeff.
game. I'll
No,
glad. Okay, here's what I'll glad game. I am glad.
that you're done watching this.
I am glad that this was the first Disney feature-length film of my parents' life, so their love for Disney didn't get jaded because they were too young to watch it. I am glad that this film is not Treasure Island, and I am glad that we watched it.
I am
I'm glad
glad
that
that
we
we
watched
made it out of the
Yeah.
1950s and we are into the 60s
right.
and moving forward.
I'm glad we watched it.
And there's so many more to
Yep,
watch.
we are complete as
And I feel like it's only going to get better from here.
So perfect segue. Our next film
I am glad.
that I will keep that in mind that she's glad about our next film, and I want you to see how she feels after it. Because our next film is from June, I apologize, June of the same year, 1960,
Okay.
and it is a film called The Sign of Zorro.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you all, again for watching our bonus episode. If you haven't and you like references in the parks, we've already discussed where these last few references are going to be. But let us know. Again, we are on Instagram, we are on Spotify, we are on YouTube, and we have the email, the deep dive in the magic pod at gmail.com. Happy Thanksgiving, happy Black Friday. Thanks for hanging out with us. And would you like to take us out?
Thanks for deep diving the magic.
Bye.
Bye.